Before we talk about protection, before we talk about solutions, thinking, we have to first ground ourselves in the truth of what Allah has already told us. Black magic and the evil eye are real, but they are not what people have turned them into. They are not unstoppable forces, thinking, and they are not operating independently of Allah. The Qur'an makes it clear that harm does not move freely in this world. It moves only by Allah's permission. When Allah speaks about magic in the story of Harut and Marut, He does not glorify it, nor does He create fear around it. Instead, thinking, He reminds us that those who learned it could not harm anyone except by Allah's leave. That single phrase changes everything. It takes fear out of the hands of creation and places it back where it belongs, with the Creator. The problem today is not that people believe in black magic or the evil eye. The problem is how they believe in it. Thinking, many Muslims speak about it with more certainty than they speak about Allah's protection. They describe its effects in detail, but forget to mention Allah's power. This imbalance quietly weakens the heart. When fear becomes larger than tawakkul, the soul begins to feel trapped, anxious, and constantly threatened. Even when Allah has promised safety to those who rely on Him, Islam never taught us to deny spiritual harm, but it also never taught us to obsess over it. Thinking, the Qur'an and Sunnah acknowledge these realities while keeping the believer calm, grounded, and protected. The evil eye is real, but so is the protection of Allah. Magic exists, but it cannot override divine decree. King. Nothing enters your life randomly, and nothing leaves your life without wisdom behind it. When a believer understands this, fear starts to dissolve. You stop asking, "Who did this to me?" and start asking, "What is Allah teaching me?" That shift is powerful. It restores dignity to the believer and removes the illusion that someone else controls your life. No human, no jinn thinking, no hidden force has authority over you unless Allah allows it for a reason. And when your heart truly accepts that nothing can touch you except what Allah has already written, fear loses its grip, and faith quietly takes its place. Once we understand that harm only happens by Allah's permission, the next question naturally arises. Why do some people seem more affected than others? Thinking. The answer is not hidden in superstition, and it is not found by chasing rumors or blaming people. It begins within the state of the heart. Weak Iman does not mean a person is bad or abandoned by Allah, King. But it does mean that their spiritual defenses are neglected. Just as a home left unlocked becomes easier to enter, a heart that is distant from remembrance becomes more exposed to whispers, fear, and spiritual vulnerability. When salah is delayed, rushed, or abandoned, the first thing that weakens is not discipline, but protection. Thinking. Salah is not just a ritual. It is a daily reinforcement of the bond between the servant and their Lord. Thinking. Dhikr is not just words on the tongue, it is light that fills the heart. When these are missing, the heart slowly empties. Thinking, and into that emptiness enters anxiety, doubt, and constant suspicion. People begin to feel watched, affected, targeted, even when nothing unusual is happening. Fear starts to grow because faith has grown quiet. Shaitan thrives in spiritual negligence. Thinking, he does not need magic or the evil eye to harm a believer who has already distanced themselves from Allah. Thinking, he simply amplifies fear, magnifies problems, and convinces the person that they are spiritually attacked, when in reality they are spiritually disconnected. This is why two people can face the same situation, thinking, yet one remains calm and hopeful, while the other feels overwhelmed and broken. Thinking. Closeness to Allah creates strength that cannot be seen but is deeply felt. A person who prays on time, remembers Allah morning and evening, and avoids what displeases Him carries an unseen shield. Even when tested, their heart remains firm. But when Iman weakens, the heart becomes fragile, and every difficulty feels heavier than it truly is. This is why the solution is never to panic, accuse unseen causes. The solution is to return to Salah with presence, return to Dhikr with sincerity, return to obedience with humility. As the heart reconnects with Allah, protection naturally returns, thinking, and what once felt overpowering begins to shrink, because the strongest protection is not found in fear, but in a heart that is alive with faith. At the heart of all protection lies one unshakable truth. Thinking, nothing shields a believer like pure Tawheed. When the heart is firmly attached to Allah alone, every other fear begins to lose its power. Tawheed is not just a belief we repeat, thinking. It is a way of living where the heart knows with certainty that only Allah benefits, only Allah harms, and only Allah controls what is seen and unseen. When this certainty settles in the heart, black magic, the evil eye, and every hidden fear shrink to their true size. This is where many people unknowingly weaken themselves. Thinking, in their desperation to feel safe, they begin to place hope in objects, people, or rituals that Allah never sanctioned. Amulets are worn, numbers are trusted, charms are hung, and visits are made to those who claim special powers. What seems like protection is actually a crack into a head. Instead of removing harm, it invites spiritual weakness, because the heart has quietly shifted its reliance away from Allah. Islam did not come to replace fear with new fears, but to free the heart entirely. The Prophet A was the most protected human being thinking, yet his protection came from complete reliance on Allah, not from objects or intermediaries. He taught dua, Qur'an, thinking and remembrance, not talismans or secret formulas. When a believer places full trust in Allah, even before relief arrives, the heart already feels safe. This inner security is itself a form of protection, because fear is often the doorway through which Shaitan enters. Tawheed also brings clarity. Instead of asking, what should I hang? Or who should I visit? The believer asks, how do I strengthen my relationship with Allah? That question changes everything. Thinking. It turns the solution inward rather than outward. It replaces panic with purpose. And it restores dignity to the believer, because a heart connected directly to Allah does not need to beg creation for safety. When Tawheed is strong, thinking, the believer may still be tested, but they are never broken. They may feel pain, but they do not feel abandoned. They may be affected, but they are never defeated. The heart remains anchored, even when the storm is loud. Because when Allah alone is your protector, no unseen force can ever overpower you. Thinking. Once Tawheed is firmly planted in the heart, Allah gives us something even more beautiful, clear, simple, and powerful protection directly from His words. The Qur'an is not just a book of guidance. It is a source of healing, mercy, and security for the believer. Allah describes it as a cure for what is in the hearts, and that includes fear, anxiety, and spiritual harm. But the power of the Qur'an is not unlocked by knowing about it. It is unlocked by living with it consistently. The Prophet Aif taught us specific recitations that build an invisible barrier around the believer. Ayatul, Kursi, thinking, when recited with understanding and sincerity, becomes a declaration of Allah's absolute authority. It reminds the heart that Allah never sleeps, never weakens, and never loses control. Surah Al-Falaq and Surah An-Nas were revealed as direct protection from all forms of harm, seen and unseen, and internal. These are not symbolic words, they are divine shields. Surah Al-Baqarah carries a unique strength. Thinking, the Prophet told us that shaitan flees from a home in which it is recited. Imagine that darkness retreating simply because the words of Allah are present. Yet many homes remain silent of Qur'an, filled instead with noise that brings no peace. The issue is not that the Qur'an does not work. It is that it is not given space to work. Consistency is what transforms recitation into protection. Thinking, a rushed verse spoken without reflection will not carry the same weight as words recited with presence. Trust, thinking, and reliance on Allah. The heart must believe that these words come from the one who controls all harm. When recited daily, morning, evening, before sleep, the believer begins to feel a shift. Fear softens, the heart settles. Peace slowly replaces restlessness. The Qur'an does not remove harm like magic removes magic. It removes darkness by filling the space with light. And light does not argue with darkness. It simply arrives and darkness disappears. When the words of Allah become part of your daily rhythm, thinking, protection stops feeling like something you chase and becomes something you live within. Because a heart surrounded by the Qur'an is never left unguarded. Alongside the Qur'an, thinking, the Prophet showed us a way of seeking protection that is deeply personal, dignified, and rooted in incomplete reliance on Allah. Ruqyah was never meant to be mysterious or complicated. It was meant to be sincere. The Prophet did not turn it into a performance, nor did he restrict it to a special class of people. He practiced Ruqyah himself, taught it to his family, thinking, and encouraged his companions to do the same. This alone removes a great burden from the believer's heart. You do not need to run from place to place searching for someone to fix you. Ruqyah is simply turning to Allah with His words and His names, asking Him directly for healing and protection. The Prophet would recite Surah Al-Falaq and Surah An-Nas, blow gently into his hands and wipe over his body, especially before sleeping. He would make dua for protection from all harm, known and unknown. There was no fear in this practice, only trust, no desperation, only certainty that healing comes from Allah alone. Thinking, what weakens Ruqyah is not the lack of a special voice or technique, but the absence of sincerity. Thinking, when a person recites while their heart is distracted, doubtful, or secretly relying on the reciter instead of Allah, impact is reduced. But when a believer sits alone, raises their hands, recites Allah's words, and places their full hope in Him, that moment itself becomes powerful. Allah responds to hearts that are humble and sincere. Thinking, living in constant protection does not mean performing Ruqyah only when something feels wrong. It means making remembrance a lifestyle. Morning and evening adhkar, protection before sleep, and dua throughout the day build a spiritual environment where harm struggles to survive. When protection becomes routine, fear loses its urgency. And it is important to remember that Ruqyah is not about instant relief. Thinking, it is about strengthening the bond with Allah through the trial. Sometimes healing is quick, and sometimes it is gradual. But every sincere recitation is recorded, rewarded, and answered in a way that is best. Because when your heart turns to Allah for healing, no harm has the final word. By the time a believer reaches this point, thinking, something important begins to change. The fear that once dominated the heart slowly starts to loosen its grip. Thinking, what once felt like a dark uncontrollable force is now seen through the lens of faith, purpose, and divine wisdom. Trials related to black magic or the evil eye no longer define a person's identity. Instead, thinking, they become moments that reveal how close the heart truly is to Allah. Islam never promised a life without tests, but it promised that no test comes without meaning. When a believer responds to hardship with patience instead of panic, and with dua instead of despair, the trial transforms. Every tear becomes a form of worship. Thinking, every moment of confusion becomes an invitation to draw closer to Allah. Thinking, the Qur'an reminds us that Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. Thinking, and that alone is enough to quiet the heart. If Allah allowed this test, then Allah has also provided the strength to endure it. Many people ask, why me? But faith gently shifts the question to, what does Allah want to raise me through this? Because some levels of closeness to Allah are not reached through ease, but through endurance. Some hearts are polished only under pressure. When a believer remains connected to Allah during a trial, they emerge with deeper sincerity, stronger tawakkul, and a humility that brings them nearer to Jannah. This is where fear finally gives way to trust. In King, the believer no longer measures their safety by how they feel, but by who they rely on. Even if the test lingers, the heart feels supported. Even if answers are delayed, hope remains alive. Inner stability is a gift that cannot be touched by any unseen harm. And when relief finally arrives, and it always does in one form or another, the believer realizes something profound: the trial did not weaken them. Thinking, it strengthened their faith, it purified their reliance, it taught them to turn to Allah before turning to anyone else. Because in the end, the greatest protection is not the removal of hardship, but a heart that never loses its trust in Allah.